This is RTV6 News at 5:30, working for you.
And now at 5:30, it is time to mask up, Indy. It is no longer a suggestion, it's an order. Why those behind it say it is so important to follow. And he's been out of the public eye for several years. New info about the health of former Governor Joe Kernan. Chris.
Here's what we're talking about in our lineup. The extra $600 in unemployment benefits many people are getting could be going away sooner than expected. What's behind that? Also this.
This is a very puzzling moment. Why people are not responding like we did collectively in other times of our history.
Why that cultural psychologist believes we're less likely to follow safety rules now. And veterinarians are concerned about a big increase in a potentially deadly but preventable disease among dogs. What they think could be behind it.
First at 5:30, face coverings are now required in public areas in Marion County to help spread the Stop a Coronavirus. The order took effect this morning. RTV6's Alyssa Donovan explains what you need to know with this mandate now in effect.
The new mandate means you have to wear a face mask anytime you're in any indoor public spaces. This includes office buildings, retail stores, or when you're walking inside of a restaurant. You don't have to wear it when you sit down, but you have to wear it when you walk inside. And anytime you're in an outdoor place where you can't practice 6 feet of social distance.
It's a piece of cloth. It's a piece of cloth that could save your life and the lives of those around you.
The executive order by Mayor Joe Hogsett is an attempt to help slow the spread of COVID-19 and prevent a quick spike in cases like what has happened in other cities.
And across the country, we are seeing unfortunate reminders of what can occur when a city or a state lets their guard down and allows COVID-19 to spread unabated.
City officials are expecting some people to be frustrated by the mandate. Dr. Virginia Kane with the Marion County Health Department says there will be fines if you do not wear a mask.
But, as always, you will still have individuals who are concerned about their civil and independent rights that will not want to comply. And for those individuals, we will be looking to fine, whether it's an individual or a business, provide fines for them in order to help address compliance.
The requirement is for everyone 3 years and older, unless you have a medical condition that prevents you from wearing one. The policy includes all indoor spaces, including office buildings, unless you are alone in your office. Free face masks are available to residents. For details on how to apply for one, you can go to our website, theindychannel.com. I'm Alyssa Donovan, RTV6.
And the free masks the city is giving out are paid for through the Federal CARES Act. The mayor told us today they have already given out over 400,000. Kyle.
Okay. And Amanda, for most of us across central Indiana, the storm chances held at bay. But if you're going to be heading out in areas like the canal or anywhere outside to get in some of that physical activity, you're definitely going to need to pace yourself because the heat and humidity haven't gone anywhere. Our temperature in the upper 80s in downtown Indianapolis, still in the 90s though. Muncie, Bloomington, and Greenwood right now at 91 degrees. Factor in that humidity, it's triple-digit heat. That's what it feels like in Lafayette, 95, the heat index in Indy. And you see that bullseye over Illinois. That's where we have some rain-cooled air. They've had a thunderstorm, and you notice it's pretty stationary, not really moving towards central Indiana. We've had a couple of downpours moving into the southeastern portions of the state around Brookville, also Metamora and the Liberty area. And look at all the lightning. We had a couple of those storms yesterday that had lots of lightning with them and certainly some heavy rain. So you want to stay indoors and let those storms just kind of rain themselves out. As we look at the evening planner here, those rain chances are going to stay fairly isolated and temperatures very warm, still in the mid to upper 80s right on through 9 o'clock. We'll be at 80 degrees at 11. And then we start to notice those rain chances coming up a little bit here as we go into the overnight hours. That's going to last at least into the first part of our Friday with about a 60% chance for some rain. So make sure you got the umbrella at least early on in the day. We'll talk about how the rain will impact that 90-degree heat in just a few minutes. Chris?
A win and loss for President Trump today regarding his tax and financial records. The Supreme Court ruled essentially the president is not exempt from being subpoenaed, saying the public has a right to every man's evidence. But Congress, as well as a New York prosecutor, are not getting the president's records just yet. The cases now head back to lower courts where the president's attorneys can still challenge the request. This all pertains to a criminal investigation into alleged hush money payments to women who claim they had affairs with the president before his time in office. Now, rising COVID cases have led to a significant increase in demand for testing. There are long lines at testing sites, supplies are running out, and results are delayed.
It's not clear to me as I look at those lines how they're managing the strategy or the triage of who gets tested, because you have a lot of well-looking people in these cars who are saying they've spent the night in their car waiting for their test. And in my mind, if they're shutting down testing sites and running out of test kits, we really should be triaging the people who have symptoms.
A Harvard infectious disease doctor told the American Medical Association anyone with symptoms should be tested, and so should anyone that finds out they've been exposed to someone else with the virus. And while waiting on test results, the CDC recommends quarantining. Meanwhile, testing results is also taking longer. Places like CVS and Walmart are now reporting wait times that are several days longer. Labs running the diagnostics are handling surges from virus hotspots. These delays make contact tracing and identifying outbreaks more difficult. Testing demand is only expected to increase as we get closer to schools opening, because in that case, Dr. Walensky says you can't wait for symptoms-based testing.
We should be testing about every 2 or 3 days to be surveilling our student body, our residential student body, to make sure that we don't have outbreaks.
Dr. Walensky points to places seeing surges like Florida, Texas, California, and Arizona. Of course, all warm climates, places where she says people are likely spending more time indoors because of AC and in less ventilated areas. All right, let's check back on the lineup here. Many people are relying on the federal government's extra $600 a month in unemployment benefits to stay afloat.
That's the difference between being able to make a car payment, make your rent.
Why it could go away sooner than expected, and the push to stop that from happening.
Former Indiana Governor Joe Kernan is struggling with health issues. The former Navy POW during the Vietnam War is now waging a private battle with Alzheimer's disease. His press secretary during his time as governor said Kernan can no longer speak due to the disease and is living in a care facility. Kernan is 74. He was a 3-term mayor of South Bend, lieutenant governor under Frank O'Bannon, then became governor when O'Bannon died in office in 2003. He remained in office for 16 months, losing to Republican Mitch Daniels in the 2004 election.
Another 1.3 million people have filed for unemployment. There are 18.8 million continued claims for people still unemployed. Most of them are receiving state unemployment and the federal government's $600 subsidy to stay afloat. But Alicia Nieves shows us everyone could lose a majority of that money sooner than they thought.
Millions of out-of-work Americans are being surprised by new information. The $600 a week they were relying on receiving through the end of July is set to end a week earlier than they expected.
And that's 1 week less of payments that families get. That's huge. That's the difference between being able to make a car payment, make your rent, get food on the table.
Heidi Sherholtz is the former chief economist with the Department of Labor and the current senior economist at the Economic Policy Institute, and explains why the CARES Act supplemental is ending so soon.
It says in the legislation essentially is that it ends on July 31st, and we all thought, the end of July. But when you look at the very specific language, what it says is that the last payment will be on the week ending on or before July 31st.
July 31st is a Friday. State unemployment systems end their week on the weekend and pay only for full weeks. So the last full week for a payout will be on the 26th.
It's just going to create enormous hardship.
Many people will suddenly go from about $1,000 a week to whatever their state's normal unemployment benefits are, which on average is about $375. But it's not too late for Congress to act and extend the $600 supplemental. Economists like Sherholtz hope they do.
That $600, extra $600 per week for people who are getting unemployment insurance is supporting spending of millions of people, and that supports the broader economy. We estimate that if the $600 additional UI payment is allowed to expire, this country will lose over 5 million jobs over the next year.
I'm Alicia Nieves reporting.
Alicia, thank you. Let's get back to our lineup. Face masks. That just continues to be a contentious issue. Why we're less likely to follow these new rules now than after previous threats to our safety.
Working for you.
All right, let's turn to the news feed. A push by Ford employees for the company to stop producing police cars. The employees asking for the change following recent incidents, including the death of George Floyd. Around 66% of police vehicles in the U.S. are made by Ford. Amazon is the latest retailer to pull gear for the Washington Redskins. Now, there have been calls for the team to change its mascot. Walmart is among the other companies to pull Redskins gear. Well, the group that oversees competitive Scrabble in North America is making changes to improve racial equality. Any so-called derogatory language is being removed from the official word list. The group made the change after taking an online poll of players. Tax day is less than a week away. The most recent data from the IRS shows millions of people still owe returns. Some of them have already filed, some haven't. H&R Block says there are a couple of reasons people may be putting it off. The deadline being pushed back this year may have confused some taxpayers, not realizing they could still file at any time. Some clients have told them they're worried about COVID safety, but still need the help. Now, there are virtual or in-person options with experts. Others may be concerned they owe money or they haven't been able to get all the paperwork they need. You can file to get an extension until October 15th if needed, but you still need to estimate and pay your taxes by July 15th.
It's important to file your taxes no matter what, because there's both a failure to file penalty as well as a failure to pay penalty. The failure to file penalty is 10 times higher than the failure to pay penalties.
Longer processing times have been widely reported. Some people doing a paper filing are waiting weeks or months for a refund. H&R Block says shutdowns paired with agents following up on some claims contributed to the backlog.
Now that we're seeing the IRS getting back into their processing centers, we're seeing those things start to pick up.
Another reminder, unemployment benefits are taxable income. H&R Block says you can choose to plan now for next year by asking to have those taxes withheld.
As Marion County enters stage 4.5 of the reopening plan today, that brings more good news for kids in Indianapolis. Indy Parks announced today that on Saturday, spray grounds and playgrounds will reopen. Those 136 playgrounds have been closed since March. The reopening of the spray grounds were delayed due to reduce overcrowding and help slow the spread of COVID-19. Kyle.
Amanda, just want to be careful heading out to those playgrounds, especially if they got those metal slides. Those can get pretty hot there with this 90-degree heat and sunshine. We've had a couple of thunderstorms trying to get going, but by and large, things are pretty quiet out there across central Indiana this afternoon. The exception, southeastern areas, and Storm Team 6 radar is showing that we've got a couple of those thunderstorms with some lightning and heavy rain moving through Liberty, also approaching the Connorsville area and even around Greensburg. A couple of downpours, and it looks like that'll be the most active area as we go through the next couple of hours and your evening. Temperature-wise, we all still have the heat. That 100-degree heat index in Lafayette feels like 98 in Muncie and 95 in Indy with an actual air temperature of 89. Tonight, we continue to only cool back into the lower 70s. One difference, though, those rain chances will actually climb a little bit here as we get after midnight. And the rainfall, even though we've had some isolated downpours that have been fairly heavy, it hasn't been widespread enough to really do much to our drought situation. So we're still abnormally dry, not quite in moderate drought, but that may change going into next week. As we look at TrueCast, you see that line of thunderstorms in Illinois, but as it approaches central Indiana early Friday morning, it kind of falls apart a little bit. So not everyone's going to be seeing the rain here on Friday. As that sweeps through, though, it will bring a change in the air from the northwest and a break in the 90-degree heat that we have had for the last 7 days now. A high of 86 in Greenwood and Lafayette, 85 in Noblesville for your Friday afternoon. And the weekend's going to carry that on with highs in the middle to upper 80s. Isolated shower or thunderstorm here as we go through those days, but a lot of dry time, especially on Saturday, with that 30% chance for some showers and storms. 7-day planning forecast for you. We will keep the 80s going through Monday, but the heat comes back and in a big way. Next week, we've got those highs into the middle 90s with very low rain chances. Chris?
When it comes to wearing masks, Americans can be a bit ornery. Some have suggested it's become a partisan debate, but as Dan Grossman found out, it can be traced back to our cultural roots.
Who knew a piece of cloth could be so contentious?
I think it's a part of our cultural DNA.
Cultural psychologist at the University of Maryland, Michelle Gelfand. That's who.
We've evolved to prioritize autonomy and freedom over rule following. And this is a kind of situation right now when we really need to tighten up.
Tighten up. It comes down to the idea that we're either tight or loose in regard to following rules. And where we as humans fall on that scale can be chalked up to one thing: survival.
Groups that have a lot of collective threat in their histories, whether it's Mother Nature's fury, like think famines and disasters, or human-made threat, like invasions or pathogen outbreaks, they tend to be stricter and tighter. And the logic is that those rules help people to coordinate to survive.
Think back to 9/11, when terror was a new threat. It was one of the few times Americans were willing to sacrifice freedoms for safety. 4 months after the attacks, a CNN Gallup poll found 50% of Americans were willing to sacrifice their civil liberties for safety measures. Nearly 2 years later, in September 2003, that number dropped drastically to only 29%.
This is a very puzzling moment, why people are not responding like we did collectively in other times of our history. And I think it's because people are confused about how serious the threat is, in part because our leadership's been also very conflicted. Once threat becomes really concrete, and it's clear that we have to follow the rules, people start doing that.
Gelfand says it's not only the words expressed by our country's leadership, but the actions taken. Without a unified message and response, she says it's only natural consensus will be split.
I think that we need very strong leadership that really helps people to overcome that impulse to really prioritize freedom over rule following during a very serious collective threat.
So where do we go from here? Michelle says the only way forward is not through shaming people who won't wear masks, rather a clear message full of credible information and stories to make a pervasive disease more relatable to those it has not yet touched.
Mother Nature's fury doesn't really discriminate who's going to get this virus or not. So tangible, concrete stories, empowering people to realize it's temporary and that they can really make a difference.
I'm Dan Grossman reporting.
Dan, thank you. At least 24 states have paused or are rolling back plans to reopen. An expert tells us that will likely have an impact on how people react.
An interesting question about reopening is what happens when there's a reopening and then a sort of a pullback of it? Do people perceive the pullback as something that then is worse? Is it more pain? Does it hurt more to have those things almost in your grasp and then taken away?
Tess Wilkinson Ryan is a professor of law and psychology. She says our views all have some sort of baseline. In this case, that baseline is total lockdown. So if you were expecting 50% of businesses and public activities to reopen, but then only 20% do, it can feel like a loss when in reality you've experienced a gain. Another baseline at play is if you personally believe that protecting public health or restarting the economy is more important. That can change how you perceive reopening efforts from political leaders and whether they're acting in good faith.
They too think we ought to reopen. They tried. And the fact that those people who share my views couldn't keep the reopening going suggests that the reclosing is good.
Ryan says pulling back on reopening plans could also cause an undermining of overall trust. TSA is ramping up COVID protections for screenings at airports. This is according to a whistleblower's lawyer. Last month, the top TSA official in Kansas complained that the agency was putting travelers at risk and that staff weren't being properly trained. Screeners will now have to change or sanitize their gloves after each time they pat down a passenger. They'll also have to wear face shields when they are not behind plastic barriers. Now back to our lineup here. A potentially deadly preventable disease among dogs is showing up more amid this pandemic. We are looking into what could be behind this spike.
Keller and Keller, right now.
We're seeing a big increase in a potentially deadly preventable disease among dogs. Blue Pearl Pet Hospital looked at data from its more than 90 pet hospitals nationwide. It found positive parvovirus cases and hospitalizations have increased 70% this year compared to the same time period in the past 5 years. It found some areas are affected more than others, but this is a nationwide trend.
In my view, the most likely sort of biggest explanation for this is the lack of vaccinations of puppies at a very crucial time during their maturation process.
Dr. James Barr with Blue Pearl Pet Hospitals says vaccination schedules are laid out to try to prevent diseases like this, but that getting those vaccinations got harder with appointments at primary care veterinarians' offices limited. He says we could see another spike in parvovirus cases if we see lockdowns again because of the increase in COVID-19 cases. He's also concerned that dogs may not be getting other types of treatments like they should.
Heartworm disease is another one that is a commonly prevented disease that, pets take monthly preventatives for that. Those are generally gotten through their veterinarians. And so without sort of those regular visits to the veterinarians, we're concerned that there's going to be an increase in heartworm diseases.
Now, he says the bacterial disease leptospirosis is another disease that could increase in prevalence if vaccinations aren't continued as they have been under normal circumstances. The pet hospital is going to be looking through its data to see if there are trends for any other diseases besides parvovirus. If your dog isn't fully vaccinated for parvovirus, it is best to limit exposure to other dogs. Your primary care veterinarian is the best person to talk to about this. At-home learning has been a challenge for students in rural school districts across the country. Tomorrow, how they're having to get creative as students prepare to start learning again in the fall.
Our forecast on Friday, a little backwards from the way it's been the last several days. We'll actually start off with some scattered showers and thunderstorms, and that will keep temperatures a little cooler. It's still going to be warm tomorrow, though, as we make our way into the middle 80s, and we'll hold those highs in the 80s through the upcoming weekend. Next week, though, the heat is back, and we are back into the middle 90s. Thanks for joining us here at 5:30. The news at 6 starts now.